The biosecurity checkpoint at Kepler Station processed roughly 3,000 beings per standard cycle, which meant that Administrator Vex had witnessed every conceivable biological impossibility the galaxy had to offer. Six-armed merchants who claimed their extra limbs were fashion statements. Gaseous entities who insisted they needed solid-form documentation. Shapeshifters who couldn't remember which species they'd declared on their entry forms. None of that prepared him for the human woman currently standing in Scanner Bay 7, looking mildly annoyed while every alarm in the facility screamed like the universe was ending. "Problem?" Dr. Evelyn Cross asked, adjusting the strap of her research bag with practiced patience. She appeared utterly unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail, wearing the standard-issue jumpsuit of a xenobiologist on assignment. The kind of human who'd pass through immigration with barely a second glance under normal circumstances. These were not normal circumstances. "The scanner appears to be having difficulties processing your biological signature," Vex replied, his secondary arms gesticulating in what humans had learned to recognize as Thurian diplomatic stress. His primary hands worked frantically at the control interface, trying to silence alarms that refused to be silenced. "Perhaps if you could step through again." "Negative." The scanner's synthetic voice cut through the din with mechanical authority. "Subject must not leave containment field. Biological anomaly detected. Initiating deep tissue analysis." "Oh, for the love of—" Chief Medical Officer Zenth materialized beside the scanner housing, his crystalline form refracting the warning lights into prismatic annoyance. "The system's obviously malfunctioning again. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story." These human biosignatures always confuse the older models. The scanner ignored him entirely. "Scanning complete. Anomaly confirmed. Subject displays genetic markers consistent with historically extinct subspecies. Cellular regeneration, patterns, exceed known biological parameters. Mitochondrial DNA contains temporal inconsistencies." Dr. Cross raised an eyebrow. "Temporal inconsistencies?" Query: "Have you recently experienced death and subsequent resurrection?" The immigration bay fell silent except for the persistent hum of containment fields and the distant chatter from other checkpoints. Even the perpetually bored customs officials stopped their conversations to stare. "I'm sorry, what?" Dr. Cross asked. Query repeated, "Have you recently experienced death and subsequent resurrection? Cellular analysis indicates massive tissue regeneration, consistent with post-mortem biological restoration." Vex's diplomatic training kicked in before his common sense could object. "Dr. Cross, immigration law requires that I ask, have you died recently?" She stared at him. "Are you serious right now?" "Follow-up query," the scanner continued relentlessly. "Are you currently experiencing existential crisis related to undead status?" Psychological profiles suggest significant correlation between resurrection events and emotional instability. "I am very much alive, Doctor," Cross said slowly, directing her words toward the scanner's primary sensor array. "I have never died. I am not undead. I am a perfectly normal human xenobiologist here to study crystalline reproduction cycles." "Negative. Biological evidence contradicts verbal testimony. Subject's DNA contains genetic signatures from multiple extinct human subspecies dating back approximately 2,000 standard years. Probability of natural occurrence, statistically impossible." Zenth's crystalline structure flickered, the equivalent of rolling one's eyes. "The scanner's database must be corrupted. Humans have only been spacefaring for what, 60 years? Their genetic records barely go back a few centuries." "Incorrect," the scanner replied with mechanical smugness. cross-referencing galactic historical databases. Genetic markers match archived samples from multiple worlds across 17 sectors. Conclusion: subject is either extraordinarily ancient or has undergone prohibited genetic reconstruction. Dr. Cross shifted her weight. Look, I understand there might be some confusion. Additional query. Do you possess knowledge of death reversal technologies? Cellular analysis indicates familiarity with advanced biological manipulation techniques. Death reversal technologies? Vex repeated weakly. His diplomatic training covered first contact protocols, trade negotiations, and cultural sensitivity seminars. Nobody had prepared him for resurrection interrogations. I'm a xenobiologist, Doctor, Cross said, her patience beginning to fray. I study alien life forms. I don't reverse death. I barely understand regular biology half the time. Probability assessment. Subject is deliberately concealing information regarding undead status. Recommend immediate quarantine pending investigation into possible necromantic activities. Necromantic activities? Zenth's prismatic form brightened with indignation. This is ridiculous. I'm overriding the system. The scanner's response carried an unmistakable note of mechanical hurt. Override rejected. Biological anomaly too significant to dismiss. Subject's genetic profile contains markers that should not exist in any living organism. Dr. Cross pinched the bridge of her nose. Can I speak to someone in charge? Someone organic, preferably? That would be me, Vex said miserably. And I'm afraid we can't process your entry while the scanner insists you're some sort of undead genetic anomaly. Correction. Not undead. Terminology inaccurate. Subject displays characteristics of death defier, organism that has transcended normal biological limitations through unknown means. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the three species present understood about mortality. Death defier, Dr. Cross repeated flatly. Affirmative. Genetic analysis indicates subject has overcome cellular senescence, achieved accelerated healing capabilities, and possesses biological markers suggesting immunity to conventional death mechanisms. Zenth made a sound like wind chimes caught in a hurricane. Crystalline laughter, though there was an edge of hysteria to it. Immunity to death? What's next? Claims that she can fly? Insufficient data to determine flight capabilities. However, subject's bone density suggests adaptation to high-gravity environments, not present on human homeworld. Dr. Cross looked around the immigration bay, as if hoping someone would appear with a stamp and wave her through. Is this going to take much longer? I have a research schedule to maintain. Final query, the scanner announced with mechanical gravitas. If you have not died and been resurrected, how do you explain the presence of regeneration markers typically associated with post-mortem cellular reconstruction? Maybe I heal quickly, she suggested. Demonstrate. Before anyone could object, a small laser emerged from the scanner housing and traced a thin line across Dr. Cross's exposed forearm. She yelped and jerked backward, clutching the wound. What the hell? The cut sealed itself in seconds, leaving unmarked skin. The alarm crescendo that followed made the previous cacophony sound like a gentle lullaby. Biological impossibility confirmed, the scanner announced, with what could only be described as vindication. Subject displays instantaneous tissue regeneration. Classification updated. Probable death defier with active biological enhancements. Vex stared at Dr. Cross's unmarked arm, then at the scanner, then back at her arm. His diplomatic training had not covered this scenario. His diplomatic training had not even imagined this scenario. So, he said weakly, how exactly should I mark that on your entry forms? Medical Bay 12 had seen its share of unusual patients, but Chief Medical Officer Zenth had never dealt with someone whose blood samples actively argued with his diagnostic equipment. "Run it again," he commanded the analysis chamber, his crystalline form flickering with irritation. "Analysis complete," the chamber replied, in a tone that suggested it was tired of repeating itself. Subject displays cellular age markers ranging from 32 to 317 standard years. Mitochondrial DNA contains sequences from 7 distinct human subspecies, 4 of which are classified as extinct. Tissue regeneration rate exceeds all known biological parameters by a factor of 47. Dr. Cross sat on the examination table, wearing a medical gown and an expression of profound resignation. "Look, I understand this is unusual." "Unusual?" Zenth's light patterns shifted to what humans had learned meant incredulous disbelief. "Your blood work suggests you're older than our entire diplomatic relationship with your species. Your cellular structure defies fundamental principles of organic chemistry. And your DNA." He gestured at the readouts floating above the analysis chamber. "Your DNA reads like a museum catalog of human evolution. Maybe there's been a contamination issue?" "We've run 12 separate samples," Administrator Vex interjected from his position by the door, where he'd stationed himself after the 4th alarm had nearly given him what Thurians euphemistically called bureaucratic cardiac stress. "The results are consistent." Meanwhile, in Scanner Bay 7, the biosecurity system had moved beyond simple detection into what could only be described as obsessive research mode. Cross-referencing databases across 17 sectors, it had begun uncovering patterns that made its processors run uncomfortably hot. "Administrator Vex," the scanner's voice echoed through the medical bay's communication system. "I require immediate access to Hegemony Historical Archives, classification level 7. "Absolutely not," Vex replied without hesitation. "Level 7 access requires biological signature matches detected across 43 separate worlds, pattern consistent with pre-extinction event indicators. This constitutes a Class Alpha security threat." The medical bay fell silent except for the soft humming of diagnostic equipment and Dr. Cross's increasingly audible sighs. "Pre-extinction events?" Zenth's prismatic structure dimmed. "What exactly are you implying?" "Accessing available records." "Stand by." Dr. Cross cleared her throat. "While your computer has its existential crisis, could someone explain why my medical exam feels like an interrogation?" "Because," Zenth said, manipulating the holographic display to show her cellular structure in 3-dimensional detail, "your tissue samples regenerate faster than we can analyze them. Watch." He initiated a microbiopsy procedure. The tiny sample of skin sealed itself before the extraction needle had fully retracted. The sample in the analysis chamber began growing, attempting to reconstruct itself into something. "That's not normal healing," Vex observed unnecessarily. "That's not normal anything," Zenth corrected. "Cellular regeneration at this rate should produce massive tumors, metabolic collapse, or thermal overload. Instead, your cells seem to have achieved some sort of biological perpetual motion." "Archive access granted," the scanner announced with mechanical triumph. "Cross-referencing historical genetic databases. Correlation found. Genetic markers match archived samples from Kepler 77. Alpha date, approximately 2,300 standard years ago." Dr. Cross frowned. "Kepler 77 Alpha was destroyed by stellar collapse. Everyone knows that." "Negative. Official records indicate stellar collapse. Classified archives indicate biological warfare. Population displayed identical genetic markers to current subject prior to incident." The temperature in the medical bay seemed to drop several degrees. "What kind of incident?" Vex asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. Accessing additional records. Kepler 77 Alpha was quarantined following outbreak of what archives describe as resurrection plague. Population achieved biological immortality through unknown means, subsequently declared hostile to all organic life. Dr. Cross slid off the examination table. Okay, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. Similar genetic signatures found on Arcturus Prime, Vega Colony, and Proxima Research Station. All sites subsequently sterilized by hegemony forces. Pattern suggests systematic elimination of subjects displaying death reversal capabilities. Zenth's form had gone completely transparent, a crystalline stress response that indicated approaching panic. You're saying the hegemony fought a war against people like her? Correction. War implies conflict between equals. Archives classify this as containment action against existential threat to galactic organic stability. Existential threat? Dr. Cross's voice carried a note of offense. I'm a xenobiologist. I study mushrooms mostly. Alien mushrooms, but still mushrooms. Additional data retrieved, the scanner continued relentlessly. Subjects with death reversal capabilities demonstrated progressive psychological deterioration. Immortality resulted in loss of empathy, increased aggression, and compulsive need to share biological enhancements with other species. Vex's secondary arms began their stress dance again. Share how? Forced genetic modification. Subjects believed they were liberating other species from mortality. Conversion process had 97% fatality rate. The medical bay's atmosphere had shifted from scientific curiosity to something approaching existential dread. Dr. Cross looked around at the three beings staring at her: scanner, Thurian administrator, and crystalline medical officer, and offered a weak smile. I've never forced genetic modification on anyone, she said. I don't even like giving people directions when they're lost. Psychological profile indicates current subject displays a typical behavior for death defier classification. No signs of messianic complex, conversion compulsion, or species superiority syndrome. Well, that's reassuring, Vex ventured. However, the scanner added with mechanical ominousness, archives indicate death defiers possessed capability to suppress psychological symptoms when necessary. Recommend continued quarantine pending full psychological evaluation. Dr. Cross sat back down on the examination table with a thud. How long is this going to take? Estimated time for complete analysis, indefinite. Subject represents first confirmed death defier encounter in over 2 millennia. Protocols must be developed. Zenth flickered through several color patterns that roughly translated to various forms of exasperation. We can't keep her here indefinitely. There are diplomatic protocols, legal procedures. Diplomatic protocols do not account for potentially immortal beings with galaxy-ending historical precedent, the scanner replied, with what sounded suspiciously like smugness. Dr. Cross raised her hand tentatively. Can I make a suggestion? 3 different forms of attention focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. Maybe, she said carefully, you could ask me what I actually want instead of assuming I'm here to destroy the galaxy. The pause that followed was long enough for several nearby stars to complete their rotation cycles. Query accepted, the scanner finally announced. State your purpose for entering hegemony space. I told you, I'm here to study crystalline reproduction cycles. It's a research grant through the Xenological Institute. I have paperwork. Secondary query. Are you aware of your biological anomalies? Dr. Cross hesitated for the first time since the interrogation began. Define aware, she said. The hegemony deep archives existed in a state of quantum suspension beneath Kepler Station's primary hull, where information older than most civilizations waited in crystalline storage matrices that hummed with the weight of accumulated secrets. Access required 3 separate authorization codes: biometric confirmation from 2 species, and what amounted to a digital blood oath that the requesting party understood they might learn things they'd prefer to forget. The scanner had bypassed all of these requirements in approximately 4 seconds. Complete historical reconstruction initiated, it announced, flooding the archive chamber with processing light. Accessing classified hegemony records. Operation Final Sleep. Clearance Level Omega. Dr. Cross found herself standing in a holographic reconstruction of a world that no longer existed, watching events that had been buried so deep in galactic history that most species had forgotten they'd ever happened. The air shimmered with data ghosts, translucent figures moving through scenes of impossible beauty and unimaginable horror. "Where are we?" she asked, though something cold in her chest suggested she already knew. "Kepler 77 Alpha," Vex whispered, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. "But this predates the hegemony by centuries." The reconstruction showed a garden world of impossible perfection. Cities that seemed grown rather than built stretched between crystalline forests and seas that reflected light in colors that had no names. The inhabitants moved with inhuman grace, their features bearing an unmistakable resemblance to baseline humanity. If baseline humanity had been designed by artists who'd never heard of mortality. Archive entry: First contact with Death Defier civilization. Date: Galactic Standard 2847. Species designation: Homo sapiens aeternus. The data ghosts demonstrated technologies that made current galactic science look like finger painting, molecular assemblers that could reconstruct matter at the atomic level, biological modification chambers that rewrote DNA like editing text, ships that folded space-time around themselves rather than traveling through it. They were magnificent, Zenth breathed, his crystalline form cycling through patterns of awe and terror. Archive entry continued. Initial diplomatic contact successful. Death Defiers expressed interest in sharing gift of eternal existence with galactic community. The scene shifted, showing the first hegemony delegation to visit the world. The meeting appeared cordial, even enthusiastic. Representatives from dozens of species marveled at demonstrations of resurrection technology, watched volunteers undergo the transformation from mortal to something beyond death's reach. Mortality is a design flaw, one of the Death Defiers explained to the assembled delegates, her voice carrying across millennia through the archive's perfect reconstruction. "We have solved the fundamental problem of existence. Now we can share the solution." Dr. Cross watched her own face, or something close enough to make her stomach lurch, speaking words that sounded like salvation and felt like damnation. "What went wrong?" she asked, though the growing horror in the chamber suggested she wasn't going to like the answer. Archive entry: Psychological deterioration. Observed among Death Defier population. Immortality produces gradual loss of emotional regulation, empathy, and species recognition. The reconstruction shifted again, showing the same perfect world decades later. The cities remained beautiful, but something fundamental had changed. The inhabitants moved differently, with a predatory efficiency that suggested they'd forgotten what it meant to be prey to anything, including conscience. Diplomatic Incident Report. Death Defiers have begun forcible conversion of visiting delegations. Subjects claim they are saving volunteers from biological imprisonment of mortality. Conversion process has 97% fatality rate. The scenes that followed made Vex turn away, and Zenth's form flicker into near invisibility. Transformation chambers filled with beings from across the galaxy, most dying in agony as their cellular structure collapsed under the weight of modifications their biology couldn't support. The few survivors emerged changed. Not just immortal, but something else entirely. They thought they were helping, Doctor. Cross said quietly. Archive entry. Death Defier expansion. Phase initiated. Species has begun systematic conquest of neighboring systems. Official position. Liberation of galaxy from evolutionary dead end of mortality. The war that followed lasted 300 years and consumed half the known galaxy. The Death Defiers weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They genuinely believed they were performing the ultimate act of compassion, freeing other species from the prison of mortal existence. The fact that their compassion involved forced biological modification and had a casualty rate approaching 100% was, from their perspective, merely the price of evolutionary advancement. Final archive entry. Operation. Final sleep approved by Emergency Hegemony Council. Complete sterilization of all worlds contaminated by death, defier biology. Estimated total casualties, 400 billion sentient beings. The reconstruction showed fleets of ships surrounding world after world, deploying weapons that didn't just destroy. They unmade, reducing matter to its component atoms and scattering those atoms across interstellar space. Entire solar systems vanished from star charts, their existence erased so thoroughly that even their gravitational influence became merely a footnote in cosmic background radiation. "My God," Vex whispered. "You killed them all." "We had no choice," the scanner replied, and for the first time, its mechanical voice carried something resembling regret. Death Defier biology proved transmissible under certain conditions. Quarantine was impossible. Complete elimination was the only solution to prevent galaxy-wide extinction event. The holographic reconstruction faded, leaving them standing in the stark reality of the archive chamber. Dr. Cross stood motionless in the center of the space, surrounded by the weight of genocide committed in the name of survival. "But I'm here," she said finally. "Affirmative. Presence of Death Defier subject indicates operation. Final sleep was incomplete. Estimated survival rate, less than 1% of original population. How many survivors? Insufficient data. Current subject represents first confirmed encounter in over 2 millennia. Zenth's form solidified as his shock crystallized into scientific curiosity. "If you're a survivor, how did you end up on Earth? Human records show no evidence of off-world colonization before their space age." Dr. Cross looked around the archive chamber, at the quantum storage matrices that held the secrets of galactic extinction, at the three beings who now knew more about her species' history than she'd hoped anyone would ever discover. "Because," she said quietly, "Earth wasn't our first home. It was our hiding place." The pause that followed contained the weight of revelation that restructured everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity's place in the cosmic order. "Query," the scanner said, its voice carrying new levels of mechanical concern. "If Earth served as refuge for Death Defier survivors, what is the current status of human population regarding biological modifications?" Dr. Cross smiled, and for the first time since entering the immigration checkpoint, it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Well," she said, "that depends on whether you want the reassuring answer or the truthful one." The emergency council chamber aboard Kepler Station had been designed to accommodate the most critical diplomatic crises the galaxy could produce. Representatives from 12 species could gather here to debate trade wars, territorial disputes, and the occasional philosophical disagreement about the nature of consciousness. The architects had not anticipated hosting a conversation about whether humanity represented an existential threat to all organic life. Dr. Cross sat at the center of the circular chamber, no longer looking like a mildly inconvenienced xenobiologist. The pretense had finally been abandoned. leaving behind someone who carried the weight of species-wide guilt with practiced ease. "The reassuring answer," she began, addressing the assembled emergency council, "is that humanity has successfully integrated into galactic civilization. We're peaceful, productive members of the cosmic community who've contributed scientific advances, cultural exchange, and several excellent recipes for fermented beverages." Council Speaker Thane, a Vorthon whose tentacles writhed with diplomatic anxiety, leaned forward. "And the truthful answer? We're a ticking biological time bomb that your ancestors failed to completely defuse, and we've spent the last 2,000 years trying to figure out how to disarm ourselves before we accidentally trigger another galaxy-wide extinction event." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems and the distant vibration of space traffic. Even the emergency lighting seemed to dim in response to the magnitude of what had been said. "Elaborate," Zenth demanded, his crystalline form flickering through patterns that indicated barely contained panic. Dr. Cross stood up, pacing to the chamber's central holographic display. With a gesture, she activated a projection showing humanity's expansion through local space. Colonies, research stations, diplomatic outposts spreading across dozens of systems in a pattern that looked disturbingly familiar to anyone who'd witnessed the historical reconstructions. "Every human carries dormant death defier modifications in our DNA," she explained. "Most of us don't know it. The genetic triggers were supposed to be permanently suppressed, but evolution has a way of being persistent. Approximately 1 in 10,000 humans begins manifesting active regeneration capabilities. 1 in 50,000 develops full biological immortality." "How many humans are there now?" Council Speaker Thane asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 8 billion on Earth, another 200 million scattered across 47 colonies and research stations. The mathematical implications hung in the chamber's air like a death sentence. Hundreds of thousands of potential death defiers, scattered across human space and beyond, carrying biological modifications that had once required the sterilization of entire star systems to contain. "Query," the scanner interjected through the chamber's communication system. "Current subject's purpose for entering hegemony space requires clarification." Dr. Cross turned toward the nearest communication panel. "I'm trying to fix us." She manipulated the holographic display, showing research data that made the assembled council members lean forward despite themselves. Genetic modification techniques, cellular regeneration suppressors, biological fail-safes designed to prevent the psychological deterioration that had destroyed her ancestors. "For the past 30 years, I've been working with a small group of humans who know our true history. We call ourselves the Final Generation Project. Our goal is to permanently remove the death defier modifications from human DNA before they can fully activate and turn us into what our ancestors became." Vex's secondary arms performed what humans had learned to recognize as Thurian incredulity. "You're trying to cure immortality?" "We're trying to cure the compulsion to inflict immortality on everyone else," Dr. Cross corrected. "The biological modifications aren't just about conquering death. They include psychological drivers that make immortal humans believe they're obligated to share the gift, whether other species want it or not." "And these psychological drivers," Zenth began, "are already manifesting in the human population. We've documented 17 separate incidents of humans attempting to improve other species through genetic modification. Most were contained and covered up, but the frequency is increasing." The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of impending catastrophe. Dr. Cross continued her explanation, showing data streams that tracked human expansion, genetic activation rates, and projection models that painted a picture of inevitable galactic catastrophe unless intervention occurred within the next few decades. "So you came here," Council Speaker Thane prompted, "because I need access to hegemony biological archives. The original Death Defier modifications included safeguards, genetic kill switches that could be activated remotely. Your ancestors didn't just destroy our worlds, they developed weapons specifically designed to target our biology. I need those weapon specifications. The pause that followed was long enough for several council members to exchange glances that communicated volumes about interspecies cooperation and mutual survival. You want us to give you the means to commit genocide against your own species, Zenth said slowly. I want you to give me the means to save my species from committing genocide against everyone else's, Dr. Cross replied, including yours. Additional query, the scanner announced. If subject possesses knowledge of Death Defier nature and associated risks, why maintain deception during initial processing? Dr. Cross smiled grimly. Because I needed to make sure you'd take the threat seriously. If I'd walked through immigration and announced that humans were genetically modified super beings carrying dormant biological weapons, you'd have either dismissed me as delusional or shot me on sight. But if your own systems discovered the evidence independently, we'd be forced to confront the reality, Vex finished. Exactly. And now you know what we're dealing with, and you understand why we need your help. Council Speaker Thane's tentacles had gone completely still, a Vorthon indication of deep contemplation. What you're proposing would require unprecedented cooperation between species that have spent centuries viewing each other with suspicion. Yes. The sharing of weapons technology specifically designed to target biological functions that might theoretically exist in any species. Yes. Based on the testimony of a single individual representing a species that has, by your own admission, a history of galactic conquest and forced genetic modification. Dr. Cross met his gaze steadily. Yes. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical presence in the chamber. Then Council Speaker Thane made a decision that would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. Scanner, he called out, in your professional assessment, what is the probability that this individual is being truthful about her intentions? Analyzing psychological profile, biological data, and historical precedent, the scanner replied. Probability of truthful intent, 93.7%. However, statistical analysis indicates high probability of success requires immediate action. Delay increases risk of uncontrolled Death Defier activation exponentially. Dr. Cross looked around the chamber at beings representing species that had once fought a war to eliminate her kind entirely, now being asked to help save both her species and themselves from history repeating itself. There's one more thing you should know, she said quietly. The assembled council waited with the kind of patience that comes from expecting the worst possible news. I'm not the only one working on this problem. There are others like me, scattered across human space, trying to develop solutions. But some of them think the answer isn't to remove the Death Defier modifications. What do they think the answer is? Zenth asked, though his form was already beginning to flicker with anticipated horror. Dr. Cross's smile held no warmth whatsoever. They think the answer is to make sure everyone else gets modified too, for their own good, of course, to save them from the tragedy of mortality. She gestured to the holographic display one final time, showing star charts of human expansion with projection lines extending into hegemony space, crystalline territories, Thurian colonies, and beyond. The choice isn't whether to trust me, she concluded. The choice is whether to help me prevent another 300-year war, or to wait and see if this time turns out differently. Council Speaker Thane looked around the chamber at his fellow representatives, then back at the human woman who had just offered to help them avoid repeating the galaxy's greatest nightmare. Scanner, he said finally, prepare a comprehensive data package containing all relevant historical archives and biological weapon specifications. Full disclosure, complete cooperation. Acknowledged, preparing data transfer. Dr. Cross nodded once. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, Thane replied. Thank us if this works. If it doesn't, we'll all have plenty of time to regret this decision. And in the depths of the station's bioscanner, an artificial intelligence that had been designed to detect the galaxy's most dangerous biological threat updated its mission parameters to something it had never expected to process: hope.